Hello friends, for today's video we're going to be doing some first impressions for Frieren Beyond Journey's End. I'm going to start with a non-spoiler section and then dive into specifics for each of the first 6 episodes, but kicking it off, I kind of actually want to start by trying to boil down my thoughts into 3 words, and I think those 3 words would be bittersweet, melancholy, and cautionary. Cautionary is not a word that I would usually associate with something that is a little bit more on the cozy side, and I'm kind of sneaking in a 4th word because it is relatively cozy. I do find that cautionary is usually a word that a lot of us think of in relation to things that are more so about how you shouldn't let violence or hatred consume you, those sorts of things. This is more so a story about not wanting to let life pass you by, but then also learning to embrace life. It's sort of these 2 extremes that it's settling within and then acknowledging that you need to find a balance within both. And this is present through our main character, Frieren. The one extreme for her that is present is very much that she is sort of just letting life pass her by. If you don't know the setup, we follow her, Frieren, who is an elf, and thus she can live a very long time. And a lot of other individuals that are companions of hers throughout these journeys are individuals who do not have the same lifespan that she does. And as such, they live a much shorter amount of time and end up passing away where she is going to continue living. The story kicks off where our character and her ragtag group of other individuals have defeated the Demon King. The first episode is even titled A Journey's End, as they've done it. They succeeded in the quest, and now they're all going to go their separate ways. And it's established very quickly that she fully expects that she will see them again, and that the 10-year journey was just a little blip in overall a very long existence for her, whereas for them, 10 years was a relatively extraordinary amount of time. One of them actually does live a long life. They're a dwarf, but they even seem to acknowledge that those 10 years were worth so much to them, whereas Frieren just sort of sees it as another thing that has happened. As a result, it's not until she fully really has a moment of acknowledging that her friends live very different lives than her that she wants to connect with people more. She's sort of searching for that connection that she never really fully embraced in the past. This is coupled with other characters who are also joining Frieren as she is beyond the journey's end and starting a new quest, a new journey. And these characters also, like Frieren's previous companions, are individuals who don't necessarily live for an extraordinarily long amount of time. These individuals are ones that you do see they want to ensure that they don't just let life pass them by, that they really take the chance, that they go on these adventures, and that they too embrace life, but what embracing life means for them is something a little bit different than what it means for Frieren. All very, very wholesome. I think that this is one of those stories where it can reach so many people at so many different phases in their life. It also can be enjoyed and appreciated by, I think, a lot of different ages of people. I think the setting is something so extraordinarily familiar. I almost don't know if the themes that we're going for in the story would have worked with a setting that was too different. I'm sure somebody could have, of course, found a way to make that work, but I think by building off of this familiar framework, it allows for us to spend more time on the quieter moments and the more introspective moments. It allows us to build the characters in a little bit more subtle ways and take our time with them. There's a lot of details that showcase this throughout these first 6 episodes that we'll get into in the spoiler section, but I also am a sucker for that classic fantasy feel, so I am enjoying the setting and the aesthetic of it all because it is sort of our classic sword and sorcery setup. I do quite like that, so they've pulled me in with that. I also think that the music that is utilized is great. I do sort of want to see what actual instruments are used in the score because they establish the more medieval fantasy setting exceptionally within the music, on top of within the different fantasy races, the way that the architecture is done. It's all great. And also on one of the episodes, I just wrote in my notes, can I live in any of these places? Because so many of the areas that our characters are traversing through, I would be like, oh, that house is cute. I'll take it. I'll take that one too. I don't even care. I want any of these. So I am enjoying so much of it. I started this non-spoiler section by giving 3 words to describe this. I'm going to end this non-spoiler section, then we'll get into spoilers, by having sort of and if you like this, try that, but a combination of two stories. And thus far, Frieren feels a little bit like, actually a lot like Tales, if you are familiar with the Tales games. I've actually only played Tales of Arise, but I've seen the look of a lot of them, and I'm like, this is just a Tales game, right? This is a Tales game that's currently just an anime and not a video game, but I need it to be a video game. It very much feels like Tales of Arise, especially with the way you're sort of recruiting people to your party, and you have these cozier, quieter moments, and even the very idea of Frieren trying to get to know people. In the Tales game, when you sit around the campfire, you can choose to go talk to certain characters to get to know them better. So I'm like, oh, it's Tales, which I love. But it's not quite as moody, I would say. There is a sense of cuteness to it all and a wholesome factor where there are also deeper themes within. And I think that in a similar fashion, you can compare it to something like Avatar: The Last Airbender. Of course, Avatar: The Last Airbender, its target demographic, while it can be enjoyed by everyone, it is more so geared toward children. And again, I really want to emphasize anybody can enjoy it though, and anybody can resonate with the themes and the characters. But I do think Frieren is a little bit, it's not necessarily a target demographic of kids. And as such, I think combining the idea of Tales and Avatar is a good indication of what you're going to get with this story. Or at least that's my thoughts, having watched the first 6 episodes. And on that note, let's dive into the first 6 episodes. I am going to be reading off a lot of my notes and just sort of giving almost like a play-by-play. I really did quite like these first 6 episodes. I just feel like it's so comforting, and it just sort of fills you with this sense of warmth as you're watching, even when there are sadder moments. Even though I used 3 words in the non-spoiler section to describe it, I almost feel like I could have made like a whole list of things to describe this show. It's whimsical, it's magical, it's cute. Anyway, we start with a sadder episode, which would be The Journey's End. She'll take him to see the shower in 50 years, but will they be alive? Because as I was watching this, I was like, I kind of think you live longer than them. I didn't know anything about Frieren before jumping into it. So I'm just kind of trying to look at the characters, and I'm like, well, that one is a dwarf. But the other 2, I don't think that they're beings that live a long time. So when she just very casually is like, oh, I'll take you to see it in 50 years, and the way that that Himmel looks at her, I was like, I don't even know if he's going to be alive for that. If he is, I don't want you two to be apart from each other for 50 years. And there's a little part of me that I'm like, I think that they love each other. At the very least, I think he loves her, and maybe she loves him but doesn't realize she loves him. And she's taking her life for granted. She's taking the people in her life for granted. So already, right away, I was like, no. Oh, okay. Himmel looking longingly at his cloak now that he's old, because she comes to visit him, and she's shocked that he's so old and small and tiny. And there's a part where he's just looking at this sort of armoire, and you see through the glass his cloak. And I said, Himmel looking longingly at his cloak with a sad face, like, his life, he's at the end of his life. No, I don't like that people die. Why is this show making me think about people dying? And then I also wrote Howl's Moving Castle, because when they go to see the meteor shower again, at first I was saying it kind of as a joke. I turned to Sean and I was like, if only he can like swallow one of them, and then maybe they'll make him live longer. But then it really did kind of look like Howl's Moving Castle. But anywho, that's not what happens, obviously. No, not the cloak, because then it shows you the armoire again, and now there is no cloak in it, and he's being buried, and I was so sad. And then they were putting the blue flowers over within his grave, and I was very sad about this. Head pat. They did acknowledge the head pat. I kind of wish they hadn't had her be like, don't pat my head. I kind of wish they would just have let her have them pat her head, and you can see it and think like, oh, before she hated it, and now she's sort of letting it happen for the sense of comfort it provides. But they did acknowledge it, which was fine. It's not like a deal breaker or anything like that. And then the last thing that I wrote for this episode is, do you like magic? Somewhat, just like me, this exchange that you get. And then that leads us into episode 2, which is titled, It Didn't Have to Be Magic. So we do kind of pick up where we left off. It is interesting that I find thus far a lot of the episodes almost feel like 2 mini episodes within one. Jumping into the specifics of this one, I started by saying RPG fishing minigame, because they start out fishing, really truly. We get introduced to Fern, and I was pretty sure that there was a little bit of trickery happening from the priest, and that he was trying to not only have have Frieren take Fern on as an apprentice. I also thought he wouldn't mind some companionship for the remainder of his life. Also, I think there is a certain level of like trying to get Frieren to, because she has this quest, because she cries, because she wishes that she could have gotten to know Himmel better. He understands that's her mission, but I think there is this acknowledgement that he realizes she doesn't know how to do that. She seems to have a very warped sense of what it means to get to know people. Warped is probably not the right word for it, but it's like she doesn't have a deep understanding of what that means. And so he's kind of tricking her to spend an extended amount of time, not only to train Fern so that she can then become her apprentice formally, but so that she can actually get to know the people that she is surrounding herself with along her journeys. Back to the specifics, I did really appreciate that when they're eating, Heiter ends up like tossing the greens from his plate onto Frieren. I also wrote, oh, poor little Fern, when it shows her looking and thinking of her family, and then the interaction between her and the priest, I thought was very, very sweet, but also so tragic. Quote, I don't want her to experience losing anyone else when Heiter is dying and he's talking to Frieren. He is so sweet, you know, he has this appearance of being flippant and silly and he just loves his alcohol, but also he is actually super wholesome, and that part made me really sad that he didn't want her to see him passing away. But I do like that Frieren gets to actually have a moment of her realizing something about someone, which is that she's ready to say goodbye. I think it was important for her to have a little bit of a sense of like agency within this dynamic, because it means that there are steps being shown of her growing and starting to understand people a little bit. From there, we do get the sort of second half of this episode, which is she goes to visit this statue of Himmel, and she is looking for the flowers that grew in his hometown, his home village. And she seems very obsessed with this. Fern kind of goes along with her. I do want to note, within this episode, you see she's telling about how he posed for hours and hours and hours, and he was trying to come up with the best, most heroic pose, and it ended up being something very simple. Later, it is not acknowledged or shown to you in a very obvious way, but there is another statue of him in a later episode where he does have one of the other poses, so I really liked that little bit of silliness within this. I also like that Frieren is starting to pat Fern's head. I thought that was quite precious. They follow the little seed rats, and I have to say, they're basically little squirrels, the idea being that they forget where the seeds end up even being. I did kind of have a stupid joke, speaking of video games, because I've been mentioning Tales of Arise and RPGs. To me, this was like the most wholesome use of Witcher senses. And the whole idea of them forgetting where the seeds are, I think that's a real thing that squirrels do. And if I'm not mistaken, I think a number of trees are actually planted by squirrels that forget where the seeds are. And if that is correct, I learned this, I'm pretty sure, from one of those little trivia things that pops up when you go to the movies and you show up really early and the previews haven't started. Anyway, that's not important. Moving on. There is a quote that I wrote, which is, I'd like to show you them, which was this memory with Frieren and Himmel. And then the flower crown as sort of the final touches on this little area of cleaning up his statue and planting these flowers. And you do see her saying like, okay, well now these are going to last for as long as possible. And I'm like, oh, what's this show doing to me? This leads us into episode 3, which is titled Killing Magic. The first thing I wrote was, haha, Frieren has reckless spending problems. This is, you see, actually her looking for a present for Fern. It's very cute that she's really trying to figure out what would be something nice to do for Fern. And I also am amused though, because it doesn't change the fact that she has a reckless spending problem, because you do get a little montage of her buying things that they definitely don't need. I also really liked that earlier we were seeing her talk about the random different spells that she collects. And I think it's in a moment where she's talking to Fern about the kinds of spells that they have collected. And one of them that just kind of gets said within a group is that, oh, we've learned to make sweet grapes sour. And then you learned that Eisen liked sour grapes. So I really liked that they're not just flat out telling you, like, we learned to do this. It's probably because Eisen loves sour grapes. That's probably why she learned. And then later, when you do see this character pop up again, you see them eating grapes. So I like that they're not telling you, they're just allowing you to kind of soak all this in. We also get some explanation as to how certain things with the magic work. So as an example, the defensive magic, it depletes the mana a lot quicker. Also, there's the idea that because so much time has passed since the seal was locked on this particular being, that it allowed humans to develop these offensive spells that in the past were actually seen as terrible and they would wipe out so many people. I couldn't get the video game feel out of my mind though, so I did write first boss battle. It was fun. I definitely felt like, okay, they're giving us a hint of what the fighting is going to be like. We're kind of slowly segueing into that. I have a feeling we're going to get some pretty fun action scenes, which we do within these first 6 episodes, which we'll get to. But this one was dealt with relatively quickly, which made sense given the whole point was like, look how much magic has surpassed your skills. Also, I wrote at the end, the hat on the stone, because there is this stone that you see when they come into this village, and this person who was once a boy is now an old man, and they have this hat. And then as the characters are walking away, you see the hat on the stone, which I thought was really sweet. Once again, I'm not going to draw your attention to this. I'm just going to allow it to exist in the background. So really appreciate that form of storytelling. Anyway, we then get into episode 4. This one is titled The Land Where Souls Rest. Once again, we do sort of have this almost like 2 episodes within one, 2 small plot lines within one setup, where the first portion is Fern and Frieren trying to clean up this beach. And you see them having to stay in this particular town for quite a while because this is something that requires a lot of time and dedication to. And then at the end, because they managed to do this just in time for the sunrise for this special event, Frieren is awoken by Fern because Frieren seemed like, even though she seemed relatively disinterested in the idea of the sunset, she still seemed like set on seeing it. So Fern ensures that she's woken up because it has been proven that she hates the mornings and getting up early. And she also never seemed to realize when her friends were annoyed at her for it. But point is, Fern wakes her up, they experience the sunset. And I think there is a little bit of a moments can be beautiful just because that nature is beautiful, that simplicity is beautiful, but also some of what makes these moments special is when you have someone to experience them with, or when that person is really enjoying the moment, it sort of enhances the moment for you as well. So there's this very sweet, touching, quiet moment between Fern and Frieren. Also, though, I did find it very relatable because Frieren is not a morning person. When Fern is questioning her as to how she's going to wake up early enough to see the sunrise, she says, I'll just stay up all night. I just really related to Frieren in that moment. Eisen returns, though, for the second half of this episode. There is a certain mage where we already acknowledged that a lot of the grimoires that are associated with this particular mage within history are usually fakes. But then there is one that supposedly has information about heaven and some form of afterlife. So you see Frieren speaking to Eisen about this, and then she and him, as well as Fern, are searching for this particular grimoire that might actually contain information that is real. And then it is through this that you discover that Frieren was actually this individual's apprentice, which indicates just how old Frieren really is. There is an exchange between Eisen and Frieren at the end of this episode. It is played again at the beginning of the next episode. It's showing them during that meteor shower when they were a lot younger. She is talking about how she doesn't plan to ever take an apprentice because if she does, they're just going to die anyway. And she says this in a very casual tone, and almost sadly, you see Eisen tell her that's not how relationships work, and then she reacts. She hardly reacts. She sort of just answers very flatly, yes, it is. And I thought this was really notable because I think she is somebody who, she's so aware of the pragmatic side of they don't live a long time, why should I bother getting close? That doesn't make any sense. That she doesn't realize how much she is distancing herself from allowing any emotions to be felt, to really get to embrace anything within life. I feel like a lot of the themes within at least this first portion, and I imagine they're going to extend through the course of this whole season, I think a lot of those themes can be boiled down in that moment as far as where she's starting from. So I really appreciated that passage, even though it was very sad to see her think of this in such a matter-of-fact way. We do now enter into episode 5, which is titled Phantoms of the Dead. I do really like that an extension of that conversation is that Frieren is talking about, once again, in a very pragmatic way, that 10 years isn't even 1/100th of her life. And there is this idea of even 1/100th has changed you. I really love that little idea because oftentimes it's these small things as they build, or sometimes just a single moment that can start to change somebody or can actually all on their own change a person. So I really liked that exchange between them. I then was really sad though, because you get a flashback of Fern with Heiter, and there's a part where he, in kind of a silly way, is saying, if you're bad, I'm gonna haunt you. And then she tells him, so if I'm bad, you'll visit me. And then you see the way that he realizes the like heartbreak he feels over that, because he doesn't want to have to leave her alone. He wants to ensure that she has companionship in her life. And then he kind of is like, I take it back. I'll visit you if you're good. And also he acknowledges that she's getting some of her sass a little bit from him. But I was just like, no. I'm such a sucker, though, I have to say, for like old people and little kids. So everything with the two of them, I'm like, why? Ugh, why are you making me look at this? Okay, I don't like it, but I do. It's just so sad. Anyway, then you do see the way that this plays into one of the aspects of the enemy within this episode that uses illusions pulled from your memories to try and bring you in, and then they consume you. And you see that they use a memory of him. I thought that was very mean. This is an example of not just the setting being familiar and us playing off of that, but also the idea of some kind of creature using an illusion, and an illusion of somebody you care about, to somehow get your attention. This is not new either, but the way it was executed by showing us this exchange previously, I did think it added a little bit more of an emotional oomph to it. I'm going to talk about video games once again in just a second. So Frieren and Fern, once they have gotten through this mountain pass and cleared it for people, they then discover this dragon and a dragon's nest, and the nest has this grimoire that Frieren is very interested in for a spell that seems kind of creepy. She has understandable reasons for thinking it would be helpful, because she wants to use it to make sure people aren't carrying weapons and that sort of thing, but the spell is to see through people's clothes, which is a little weird. But anyway, so Fern is even like, that's the spell? Point is, though, they look at this dragon, and Fern is told by Frieren, like, oh, go ahead, it's sleeping, so, like, launch a spell at it. And they do this, and it does nothing, and so now they run away. Once they get away, and Fern is spent, Frieren's like, okay, so we just need to do that over and over and over again, and eventually we'll win. And so in my notes, I wrote, when you're under-leveled for the boss. I also feel like that's just every boss in Elden Ring, right? I also was sad, though. I wrote in my notes, don't hurt the dragon. I know that we do see that the dragons attack villages and stuff, but it was sad. It's just laying there by its nest, so I was kind of bummed out that they were firing at it. But I acknowledge that it is an enemy, like many of the others in this world. And this is when we are introduced to Stark. This character, I think, was very needed. I already was enjoying Frieren and Fern. However, I do feel like they bring in a slightly different energy to the party, and anytime you sort of have this ensemble cast of characters, I do feel like there is something exciting to building and building and building through these different personalities, and seeing the ways that these different personalities interact with each other, how they push each other, how they grow, how they get through different situations, how they bring different things to the table. So I was really happy to be here, and I think this is when I already was enjoying the story, but this has made me exceptionally excited to move forward. I do like the whole he's a fraud setup, where he stood up to this dragon in the past, and then it, for whatever reason, went away, and now everybody's like, you're our hero, and he's like, I didn't do anything, and also I was terrified, so I don't want to leave. These people are nice. They feed me good bread. Realized that he was Eisen's apprentice, and thus it is through Eisen's recommendation that Frieren decides to try and recruit him. I already like this character. I like their personality. I like that they're a little different than our characters that we've gotten before. But I think what really pulled me in with them is when you discover, when you have this sort of flashback between Eisen and Frieren having a conversation, and he mentions that Stark had run away in the past, and that means that he is like him. And then that scene, it's recontextualized for you of Eisen, where he sort of is praying, and you see his family members' graves, and the idea that he too at one time ran away. As a result, there is even further motivation within them to fight for other people. They ran away from that, so now they want to sort of make amends for that decision in the past. And that was very heartbreaking. And also, I feel like the parallel and him seeing that in his apprentice, I thought was very well done. It is from here that we enter episode 6, which is the hero of the village. And we get this fantastic fight between Stark and the dragon. I really enjoyed this. I said before that I felt like we didn't really need to flesh out the fight between the demon that the seal was going to be breaking soon. We didn't really need to do that because the whole point was to show that when time passes, things can advance, all those things. Then we get to this point where it's like, oh, we're going to flex a little bit. The animation was fantastic within this fight. It wasn't even that long, but I was sucked in for the entirety of it. I absolutely really enjoyed it. And I think thus far, in my mind, the mages are the most powerful. So I really like that we get to see a different kind of fighter and why they're an integral part of the party. I thought it was great. And it is kind of fun that he defeated it all on his own. He didn't even really need Frieren to enter the picture. I really liked this fight, even though there's a part of me that's like, I still want the dragon to live. I also wrote in my notes that, because Frieren gets very excited as they go into the nest, I was like, is Frieren a little bit of a hoarder? I'm wondering if as we get further into this, if it's going to start to feel less episodic / mini episodes, and if we're going to start to get arcs that last for longer. But regardless, we end the dragon arc and the hero of the village arc within episode 6, and then we get into a new area. And this is where the theme that I talked about in the non-spoiler section of some characters are maybe trying to settle into something for too long, and other characters are trying to embrace life. I see that, I think, realized within this section because Frieren, in the past, sort of let life pass her by. And with the opportunity to retrace her steps on this journey, she is now in this area where, yes, she wants to learn more about spells, but I also think she just really wants to soak everything in this time around. And I think it's really making her realize just how much she misses her friends. Whereas you see with Fern and Stark, Fern is irritated and Stark's like, I don't know what's going on with her. I'm also enjoying the dynamic between these characters. Just want to say I'm throwing that out there. I'm not trying to like instantly ship characters. I'm enjoying, as I said before, you get all the different personalities, and I'm liking these two as almost like fun opposition to Frieren, because previously Fern just kind of has to go along with Frieren and her a little bit eccentricities, I'll call them. Whereas now you see that there's another person in the group who's not an elf, and Stark, she asks him, hey, do you want to spend the next 2 years in the city? And he's like, no. And then he's like, what? Okay, fine. Have some of my ice cream sundae, basically. And she was like, no, it's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying I'm glad you're normal. And you're like, oh, okay. So these two are like, we can't just sit around. And now that Stark's here, you have like 2 against 1. We can't just have Frieren getting her way as the person who is the mentor figure. You do see there's a conversation between Stark and Fern as they're looking out, and you're seeing a flashback between Stark and Hyson. And also Hyson was so fatherly and cute with him that I'm like, oh, I wish the two of them can spend more time together. But anyway, he says, I don't have a lot of time. And there was a part of me that's like, why? That's the first like, hey, I don't like that line. Okay, that's not the first one. There have been many. And then the last thing I wrote in my notes, I wanted to take my time, which is, again, playing back into the idea of why maybe Frieren wasn't that anxious to move things along. She probably could have just said who she was initially, and that would have gotten her through. But we do see her have this image as they are walking through the gates where she sees Himmel in front of her, and he's looking, and you even see Stark talking about, oh, my master said that this is what it was like for him, and she's like, yep, it is. And I'm like, oh man. So I am enjoying the sort of overlapping, not quite that it's overlapping timelines, but it's almost like memories are being superimposed onto the present as new ones are being created, and we're learning, and it's very well done, and I'm enjoying it very much. I am eager to see where all of this goes. As I said before, this is sort of like a comfort watch for me, which isn't meant to try and act as though it doesn't have depth and value. I think sometimes we talk about comfort reads or comfort shows as just things you throw on. You don't have to engage with them very much. That's not what I mean at all. But even though currently it is a comfort show, I am wondering if it's going to expand into a lot more. And I really want to emphasize, I'm not trying to say it's not already got depth. I'm just curious to see where we're going to go from here. It is a relatively long first season, so I look forward to seeing what else we get. I'm curious about potential other new party members that we're going to recruit along the way. I really need this to be an RPG video game. Badly, I want this. It's worked in already. They're explaining how the magic works. There's a mini game of fishing. I didn't even say this before about Stark and his resolve. And I'm like, okay, resolve gained. You need resolve for certain fights. You already have the different kinds. Whatever. I don't need to harp on this. I just need a video game for it. This is great. Thoroughly enjoying, can't wait for more. That's how I'll sum it all up. Thanks so much for watching. If you'd like to add some thoughts about the first 6 episodes, feel free to do so. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.